Hi everyone. This is our first video and I wanted to welcome you to Jennabea Creates. What we're going to do, our first painting is we're going to paint cherry blossoms, and some of you actually were on our online Zoom where we did this together. This is to sort of help you, with being able to look at this and at your leisure and go back over the steps that we used when we did the last painting. So anyhow, hope you enjoy. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and kind of talk my way through, let you guys know what we're doing. You might see that I am repurposing a canvas, so I've actually had a painting underneath it, and I went ahead and I painted over white. Don't hesitate, when you're not happy with your painting and you want to try something new, go ahead, paint over it. It's okay to repurpose and use those surfaces again. So it's a way to save some money, and especially if you're not happy with what you had before. So anyways, so I want to get started. When we did the kits with paint that you might have received, and then we used these colors. You just have a series of some blues and some white, some brown, a little bit of green, a gold color, and three variations of pinks, dark, medium to light. And then that way what we're going to do is we're going to kind of build some dimension with our painting. Anyways, let's get started. I am using different brushes, but typically have a tendency to use one brush once I get going on the painting. That's just my preference. When you do finer work, you may want something that's pointed and smaller for fine details, something bigger for larger areas. We can play a little bit and I can show you some of the differences between the two. But let's go ahead and get started. So I like to do the background on this to achieve just sort of a soft, make sure we're going here. Sorry. Just to make sure that we have a soft background is to just start with a little bit of paint, and I'm not going too extreme with the amount of paint because we're just going to kind of roll this sponge on the surface just to give something to blend. And I'm just using white again just to have some soft light color, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to dip into just a little bit of this soft blue and just see, so I can kind of achieve sort of cloud-like surface. See how soft. And I'm just rolling with the sponge. I'm not pushing really hard. I'm just holding it on the surface and I'm rotating just like I was waxing a car. And then so what I'm doing is just adding just clouds of color. And this will be the background, what's behind our branch of cherry blossoms. Yeah, so just adding white because we don't want to go, if I started out with the dark color, actually lightening up things takes a whole lot more paint to actually achieve lightening it up. So it's better to start light to dark. That's a good tip. So now I can add in a little deeper color. I'm hoping that you can see the color that I'm adding in there, just so it has some blue. And then I can darken this as I want to, rather than try to lighten it up, which takes a whole lot more. And mostly, so you're also seeing I'm doing rotating motions rather than scrubbing back and forth. If you do that, when you begin to put color on, you're just going to see lines and streaks. So if I do things in a colorful or in a rotating manner, just like this, and you can probably see that, then I can blend it without getting any streaks if I want to keep it soft. And I'm lightening up as I get towards the edge. And that just helps to blend things together. So that's a pretty color. I can add a little bit more white in there so I can keep things moving. Sometimes with acrylic paints, that's what we're using today. So a little bit on acrylic paints. There are mediums that you can add to acrylic paint when you want to keep it more fluid. And what it does is it retards the drying time. So you don't have to, because acrylics dries extremely fast, which is kind of nice when we're doing a painting like this. We want it to dry fast because we're going to be layering things. But if I want it, so you can, I don't know if you can tell, but some of my paint is actually drying because I'm not applying super thick paint. I'm only applying thin layers. But I can go back in and I can add a little more white. So yeah, if I needed it to dry much less faster, less faster, is that a term? Then I would definitely think about adding some of the medium that helps it slow the drying process. But in this case, we want it to dry. And we're going to have stuff that's going to go over the top of this, so it doesn't have to be exact. All I'm doing is adding these soft, cloudy things to the background. And that's almost dry. That's super dry over here. Okay, let's see a little bit of this color. And I have not rinsed my brush or my sponge. All I have done is continue to dip in other paint. If you don't have to feel like you have to. When you're doing something like this, you don't have to rinse the brush because you're really blending all of these colors anyways. Now, if I was switching over to a different color, I might consider it, but I actually kind of like it when you put colors together and allow them to, just kind of see what it's going to do. Let's do a little bit of this here. Okay. Now I do like, in a painting that has flowers in it, and it's growing outside, so I like to add just a little bit of sunlight. And so that little bit of gold that I've added on your palette and is something that you can just consider like, oh, maybe the light would come from this direction and into my painting. So I'm just going to put a little bit of gold in there, and it really looks nice with it. It's not actually mixing with the blue. It's layering over the top of it. And then we're going to probably add a little more sunlight in there after we get things going anyways. But my sunlight is coming from the top of my painting and into the rest of it. I'm going to add just a little bit of softness here because I looked a little unfinished. Another thing to consider when you're doing a painting, a lot of times we don't have frames. So you may have an edge. This is a very thin edge. This is not called a gallery wrapped. Gallery wrapped are a lot thicker. You could still hang this on the wall without having to have a frame on it. So when you're painting it, consider the edge and what would flow over the edge so that when you're in a room and you're looking at it hanging on the wall, you're not going to see a white edge. You're going to see the continuation of your painting. And that just makes it more beautiful, and of course you don't have to then consider buying a frame for it. Now you could buy a frame for it, of course. This is the width typically. This is a much thinner. This is a nice width for when you're using, putting a painting in a frame. The really thick ones, like I said, are typically, they're called gallery wrapped, and they're going to hang on the wall without a frame. So let me finish the edge here. As the rest of it dries, and believe it or not, that is drying very fast. No humidity in the air today, I guess. So hopefully you can see where we're at. We just have, actually, I think I'm going to do it. Yeah, let's do it that way. I decided to change my angle of my sunlight coming in. It's mostly coming in this way. So I will now rinse. I will put some water on my sponge because I can use this again. One of the things to remember is, and I'm just going to get it wet so it just doesn't dry out on me. And I'm going to set it aside. And I get messy. So, one of the things to always consider with paintbrushes is, you know, some brushes are inexpensive, some are expensive. You can spend a lot of money on brushes, but if you take care of them, they will last. Keeping them clean while you're working, especially when you're working with acrylic paint, is super important because when, that one's, oops, well, so much for that one. So when that happens, so when you're in the middle of working with acrylic paint, the paint is water soluble. When the paint dries, it has a polymer in it, which means it then becomes permanent and water soluble, or not water soluble, but yeah, it's almost like a rubber base. So it cannot, it'll repel the water. So cleaning the brush after the paint has dried is not going to typically work. Sometimes I'll use a little alcohol, you know, rubbing alcohol. Sometimes we'll take it if it's not a lot. But overall, you kind of trash your brush. If you haven't rinsed it throughout, a decent brush can last for many, many, many paintings if you continue to take care of them. So this one's been around a while. But so let's go ahead and, in fact, I'm going to use this one because that looks like I've used it a little bit. So I kind of want to think about, you know, if I have a branch of cherry blossoms, where are they going to come from? Which part of my painting and what's going to make it interesting? I'm going to think that I would like my painting to have branches that come down through here. Kind of come from a corner, almost just a little bit below that corner, and then they're just going to kind of meander. So I'm going to dip my brush in some of this brown paint, but I don't want the paint to be super thick or super watery. Because less is best sometimes. You do not have to have this big, thick line to do that branch. Our painting is not a realism. Our painting is going to be what our expression of a cherry blossom branch is. So I'm just going to start over here, and I'm going to hold my brush like this. I'm going to show you a little technique that I like to use. Cherry trees are very gnarly and kind of nebby and kind of meander. So a way to achieve that is to just kind of start with your brush and kind of move back and forth, and then in a direction that I want that branch to grow. But I don't know if you could see that. So I just am holding my brush this way, and I'm rolling it. And I'm using a flat brush. It doesn't matter. You can use a rounded brush, which a rounded brush has just that tip and it's round. I like flats, chiseled edges, because you can achieve a lot of different things. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just going back and forth, and I'm dragging it and lifting my brush as I decide where I want to kind of end my branch, or the small branches that come off. So here's one. And I don't have a lot of thought in this. I mean, other than, I kind of think about the areas that I want those branches to come out. And I think I'm going to add one more branch down here. And sometimes those cherry branches go down and then come back up. I am being thoughtful of where I'm starting and where I want it to end, even though I'm kind of concentrating on that squiggly motion, see? But I do want it to end, and I'm lifting my brush as I get towards the end of where I want to go, because my branch is not the same thickness throughout. It actually gets smaller. If you look at how branches grow, they don't grow all the same thickness all the way out. They grow thicker and then they get thinner. So, okay, I like that. I think that's good. I think we've got our branches. So now I'm going to rinse my brush. Very important. So I always tell everybody, have some either paper, which is what I've got underneath this, or paper towel, something that you can, take the excess water off of your brush with, okay? Now I want to go ahead and start our flowers. And what I would like to do is use the deepest pink first. And why is because I'm going to build some type of a dimension to this, and the lightness and the dark, so the shadow effects and stuff, without getting too complicated or too complex with how I'm painting this, because we're just doing this in layers. So I'm going to consider where I want, say my first cluster of flowers, and I'm thinking right here is a good place to start. I want 5 petals. So if you could see that what I did was just 5 petals, and I overlapped it. It's okay, that's what I wanted to do, because clusters of these flowers don't just grow separate from each other, they grow one on top of the other. So, just 5. And I'm not being real particular, I'm just throwing in 5 petals. 5, 5, 5. But what if I was looking at the side of the flower? If I'm looking at the side of the flower, I might not see all 5. I might just see 3 or 4. And I might just have a few buds. And that's just that, just a few buds. Because they grow very close to the branch, by the way. The blossoms don't come out like a stem like on, say, a daisy. You see a long stem and you see a flower. These grow along that branch quite close. So now I'm going to continue to add where I want actual clusters of flowers. And it's nice in a painting when you start to think about design on a painting. It gives interest if you don't put everything central in your painting, that you let some parts of it actually flow off of the side of the canvas and the edge. Yeah. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. I'm left-handed, so I'm right on top of everything. A few little buds. And I'm holding just on the side of that chisel to just kind of throw those little buds on there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm sticking with my darker color right now, because my objective is to layer the colors. And I don't want to get sidetracked and start adding other colors and other colors. This is just the easiest way to do this, a particular painting, and what we're doing here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I even got in a little bit of the brown. I'm going right over top of it, because remember, it's growing on the branch. And even away from. weeds, they do kind of come out a little bit, but if we've got clusters, then we know that they're growing a little bit out. Okay, here. Okay. I'm surprised my dog's not barking. She's always barking. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So now what we'll do is just to, now we want to add another dimension of color on our clusters of flowers. Remember, we're layering. So you don't have to have rinsed. I really didn't have to rinse this. I didn't have to rinse my brush. Honestly, this is a painting you could continue just to keep putting extra paint on. Although remember, you don't want it to dry between. It can dry up close to this area here while you're adding more colors, and then you're going to have an area in here that all is loaded with paint that dried, and you don't want that to happen. So now I'm going to go into the second color of pink, and this is the next lightest color. So I've got this dark pink, I have a medium pink, and then I have a light pink, and then I have white. So now what I'm going to do with that rosy color here, I'm going to go right over top, right there. Okay, and now you probably can see that they stick out a little bit more than the dark pink as I'm laying in those petals, 5 petals, and then alternate the areas. You can actually lay a couple right on top of the others that you just did in the darker pink. See how much it's already building some dimension there. I'm even going to add just a little peak on my little buds. Here's one little hair flower right on top of that other one. And that just gave it just a little bit more life. Okay, here we go. Isn't that nice? So now you can kind of probably see, hopefully, that, I'm building and I'm layering and it's adding dimension and actual life to this. It means that there's something in the background, and now I'm filling in what's called a midground. Hear the birds outside. It's really pretty today. I love flowers and I love nature. It's really inspiring to me. Lately I have been enjoying my yard. I've got some roses in my yard, and the roses are so pretty right now. I used to live in Ohio and I couldn't grow roses, and I missed it. Now I can't get enough roses. Okay. So we'll just leave it at that. So now you can see I've added another layer by adding in the lighter color on top of, some of the darker pink. So it looks like it's coming out at me a little bit more. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into that lighter pink, the lightest pink that I have. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add some more. And I did not rinse my brush. And I am going to just kind of be strategic about where you're putting it. You're thinking about building that lightness. So you want to go over top of some of the the secondary color that we put in, like there. I just add a couple. I'm going to put one right here. I'm going to put one right in the middle because the middle is picking up all the light. And that's what happens. It's the light that comes in and the light that creates the variations and the hues of what we're painting. So, just those little hints of light on top of the other colors has just given so much depth and so much more to this painting than just having a flat color. One color just doesn't do it. This way it feels alive, and it feels, even though it's an expression, because it's certainly not the real deal. These are my cherry blossoms coming out of my head, and I didn't have to draw anything. I just started painting. Okay, now kind of get some of the excess off of that, and then I'm going to go into some white. That would be like the last, and let's do the white, just kind of add some hints into some of those very last petals that we just added. So we added some of those, the lighter pink, and all I'm doing now is just kind of tipping and giving just a little another dimension of lightness to it. Cherry blossoms, when you look at them, you can see there's so many colors, a lot of light, white, light pink, peach colors. Cherry blossoms are other blossom trees. I think these are cherries myself, just because I think it's, I don't know if it's cherry blossom time. Maybe it's just past it, but yeah, that's pretty. See, we haven't even been painting that long here. And remember, you know, gosh, be kind to yourself when you're painting. Your painting's not going to look like my painting. My painting's not going to look like anybody else's. It's my brush strokes. Everybody has their own style or technique or the feel of their brush, and you're going to lay paint down different than me, but don't be afraid to do it. That's the biggest key, is be brave, enjoy it, learn the process, learn the techniques. And I'm all about learning technique. Today we did these very soft, cloudy background that gave us a nice place to lay this branch with these beautiful flowers. And they're just hints of flowers. They're not exact. And neither are the branches. The branches are pretty much just barely there. Okay. Speaking of branches, and I didn't really have to rinse that because I do want to add let's put just a little bit of this, kind of a light pink. And let's just add a little bit of highlight on the tops of the branches, because if I was a light coming through, the light coming through is going to land on the branch somewhere. And I'm going to lay it sort of at top. And then I'm going to put just a little dab of yellow. Just that little bit of yellow, because remember the sun comes in and that little sun's going to land on certain places. When you're outside and you're looking at plants, pay attention to where the light lands on things. That's really quite interesting. You know, when you get to enjoying painting and stuff, you're gonna really be mindful of seeing those things. So since I'm in the yellow, I'm going to use a little yellow, a little white. I'm just going to make a little soft color. And I'm going to kind of drag my brush, because I don't want this to be a very wet brush. I want it to be kind of a dry brush. And I am just going to throw in just a hint of yellow in some of these. Only the ones that I think I would see the face of. Maybe I can put a little bit more yellow in there. And I'm just putting it where the center, where the petal grows, and where that center, like here, it would grow right in there. Right there. So I'm just adding just a little bit of hints of yellow because it's also giving it another layer of interest in this painting. So it's not all pink. And it's a little bit of yellow, and then we'll kind of detail just a little tiny bit of those centers as this dries. And remember, this paint dries pretty fast, so it'll let us, you know, play with the next steps pretty quickly. I really like acrylic paint, simply because of the drying time. I typically paint pretty fast. I paint murals, and when I paint murals, being able to cover areas quickly and layer, you know, to bring things to life, but be able to do it quick is kind of nice. Plus it's waterproof after it's done, so if it's outside the mural, then it is lasting. So just keep that in mind if you paint rocks and things like that. Acrylic paint is great. Use your acrylic paint. You can smudge it off of a rock if it's a really smooth rock, but you can also later put on a little bit of a spray acrylic. That spray acrylic will give it enough of a coating to keep it from wearing off too fast if it's out in the elements. Now, okay, so let's let that kind of dry a little bit. I'm kind of thinking I want to add just a tiny bit of green, just because spring green is so pretty, and eventually as those blossoms start to fall off, that little bit of green starts to come out and surface. So that limey green. And so I'm going to mix. We've got a green. It's a very dark green. I don't want that dark green. I want a very light spring green. And so I'm going to mix a little bit of green and a little bit of yellow together to change it to a secondary color, you know, and then that's going to be kind of that limey green. And then with that, like say where the buds are, I might add just a little bit of a leaf, you know, not much, just to show that, you know, somewhere there's coming out something, just to give it another layer of interest. If you add a little bit of green, but not a lot, I'm not going to add a lot. I just think that's enough for me. Don't overdo. Stop and take looks at things. And then when you take a look at it, which I just did, then you can kind of see what you might want to add, or, you know, how much more that you need to go. You can overdo. But you'll know when you're done. Enjoy it. Oops. Honestly, we could quit right here. But I do want to add just a little bit more interest, and that's going to be if I use a pointed brush. So this is a round with a point. You can see probably better that that got a little bit of a point to it when I got it wet, and then fling it, and it should come to a nice point. Good brushes, really good brushes, will always do that. So even if you're at the art store, say you're at Dick Blick's, you know, and you're buying good brushes, don't hesitate to ask for some water and put your brush in water, fling it, and if it holds a nice point, it's a good brush. If it doesn't hold that point, it's not worth the money if it's too much. So now we can go back into either the green or the brown, and I like to make it just a little watery, not super, super watery like watercolor. And I like to roll, gently roll, because I want to maintain that brush point. And on cherry blossoms, they'll have little stamens that come out. I don't know if you can see that. But all I'm doing is just on a few. You don't have to get over the edge because if, you know, too much is too much. I'm just putting a hint of little stamens on some of these. So I am putting first little tendrils out, and then I kind of swoop across with dots. And that is like, now what do you call those? Stamens? It's where the bees go, where the bees get their pollen. And this is actually a little wet yet, so I might just run into pink and it just starts to blend, or not. It's okay. So that little tiny bit of detail kind of is nice. It added a little interest right here. You can really see that one probably. Just adds a little bit of interest. Okay. If you want to, you know, add a little bit more detail to any of your branches, you know, you can do it, or darken any areas if you feel like you need it. This is a good time to do that. And I'm not being overly particular. Most of the, you're going to see too, most of the flowers kind of, the flower blooms upward towards the sunlight. So there is kind of a motion to the flowers. They don't all just, they don't go down as much as they, you know, now this one, he's kind of going down. But I think that mostly they kind of, their heads turn to the sun. Okay. So you guys get the gist of this. And sometimes there's some just pieces of branches that don't have anything on it. It's okay to add that too. Just looks a little interesting. The underside of my branch is darker than the top because the sun is coming from the top on my picture. Okay. And you can go on and on. You can add as much of the little details as you want to. Last thing I'm going to do though, I'm going to rinse my sponge. I've really got my hands full of paint, but that's okay. I'm going to add just a little bit more light because I really like that little bit of yellow in there. I think it just gives so much to the painting when you have a little bit more of that yellow. Because that sun is coming in. Just through that dappled, it's dappled in there. Okay. I say it's done. I'm going to give it the done. That was a good quick painting. This way you can kind of watch and stop and watch it again and again. It's really about learning some techniques. We layered color. We started with a nice muted and soft background. We laid in our branches. So you think of just always considering what's the next step and what's the next layer. We are so glad that acrylic paint dries quickly, that we can paint through a painting quick. And I didn't muddle colors. I don't know if you noticed that. I did not blend and mush colors that were too much together so that it ended up muddy. You know, if I had done too much of the pink with the yellow, it would have just made a muddy color, and it wouldn't be so interesting. So you can lay translucent colors with acrylic, and they call that glazing. I could actually wait till this dries and just lay a whole yellow across the top if I wanted to, and then go back in and add some light colors with some of the flowers. But we're going to stop at that, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and we'll go on to the next painting, and maybe you guys could let me know how I did. This is the first. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.